In 1991, a series of murders in a hospital in Lincolnshire would shock the world.
A chilling pattern had emerged from the collapse of 13 children, 4 of whom had died.
No one could believe that a nurse could kill 4 defenseless children and attempt to kill 9 others.
There was a general feeling that she was being fitted up, you know, that it couldn't possibly be one of us and it couldn't possibly be her.
One of the problems with killing in a healthcare setting is that as soon as the murder is over, the crime scene itself is sterilized.
She would be known as the Angel of Death, but was Beverly Allit born to kill?
I believe she is a cold-blooded, calculating killer.
It was March 1991. In the market town of Grantham, 5-month-old Paul Crampton had been suffering from a minor chest infection for some time and was not getting any better. Eventually, his concerned parents thought the safest thing to do would be to take him to the paediatrics ward of Grantham Hospital for a checkup.
He was described by the hospital staff as a happy wheezer, so of course we were concerned. Our child was in hospital, but we weren't worried. We certainly saw this as a precautionary matter, just to deal with this chest infection.
The doctors on Ward 4 decide to keep him in overnight as a precaution. His parents are relieved Paul is now in safe hands, but their calm was short-lived. Within hours, Paul's condition had turned serious.
When I returned to the hospital, I turned into a scene of utter chaos. Paul was laid in the arms of a nurse. He was grey, clammy, cold.
The doctors were called. Paul, whose heart had virtually stopped, was attended by the resus team.
When I came to see the baby, he was shut down, pale, sweaty. So I immediately attempted intravenous line and gave some glucose. He recovered miraculously.
Paul responded well to treatment, and quickly calm was restored to Ward 4, but questions remained.
He had recovered from this hypoglycemic attack, and of course at that point my attention turned to why this had happened and what was the cause.
This was something totally unexpected. It proves that the baby had low sugar, but we do not know why a baby has glucose deficiency.
The hospital staff were certainly in a state of confusion and worry, without answers. They could not understand and comprehend what was happening to Paul, but it seemed to me bigger than that, but I didn't understand why at the time.
Little did David know that his son Paul's sudden arrest wasn't the only unexpected incident Ward 4 had seen in previous weeks. In fact, by average standards, Ward 4 was seeing a very bad run of luck when it came to its young patients.
It was over winter time, so you do get an increase in the number of sick children over the winter. It's normal, but it just seemed worse than normal. It was the worst winter that we'd ever had.
7-week-old Liam Taylor was the first to die. Liam had been brought in with a mild chest infection, and within hours of being admitted to Ward 4, had inexplicably collapsed with respiratory failure.
He did have pneumonia, so he was very sick, but he had deteriorated so quickly. The consultant, Dr. Naniakara, was really upset.
He had showed signs of respiratory and cardiorespiratory difficulties, what we call acute collapse, totally unexpected.
And they tried to revive him, but unfortunately they basically said to Joanne and Chris Taylor that it looked like they were going to lose him. And Joanne Taylor and Chris were basically saying that they didn't want him prodding around with tubes and that if it was all going to be futile, they just wanted him to rest. And Liam died in his father's arms.
Just 2 weeks later, 11-year-old Timothy Hardwick, a severely disabled child, was admitted after fitting at school.
I had asked Beverly if she would admit him and watch over him while I was doing the drug round. I hadn't finished the drug round when she called out that there was a problem.
Timothy had turned blue and was barely breathing. An emergency team attempted resuscitation. But at 6:15 p.m, he was pronounced dead.
Often children who have a disability can have a shorter lifespan because of fits or because they get pneumonia or something like that. So it wasn't totally unheard of, but it was sad all the same.
And again, just 5 days later, another child, 15-month-old Kaylee D, suffered 2 unexplained respiratory arrests. The first was unexpected, but the second bewildered staff. Concerned they had no real answers, doctors transferred Kaylee to the larger Nottingham General Hospital, where miraculously she quickly recovered. So with 4 sudden and largely unexplained incidents happening in close succession, the staff on Ward 4 were growing unsettled.
All of us had our own anxieties, worries. We were very upset.
You try to make sure that what you do is the best you can, and when it doesn't happen, when you have children that die, you find it really hard.
For David and his wife, the panic was over for now, and their 5-month-old son, Paul, was on the mend.
Beverly Allit, being the nurse on duty, went to take down the drip, and once again the child became cyanosed and the resuscitation team were called to restart the child's heart.
Paul Crampton was successfully revived again, and for 3 days remained happy and content. So stable was Paul, in fact, that doctors felt as though he was safe to return home, and preparations for him to do so began.
I'd gone to the hospital canteen to get some lunch. When I came back, Paul was having another hypoglycemic attack.
With this third unexplained incident, enough was enough. The doctors were at a loss, and Paul needed help fast. On another glucose drip, he was rushed to the Queen's Medical Centre, a larger hospital 20 miles away, where he quickly recovered.
Now, during that last attack, Dr. Porter took blood from the child, which was sent off to the University of Cardiff for analysis.
To make sure Paul Crampton got to Nottingham safely, a concerned nurse took it upon herself to accompany them in the ambulance.
Nurse Beverly Allit volunteered to go with my wife and be with her during what was clearly quite a traumatic journey.
On the surface, the inexperienced nurse had had a terribly traumatic beginning to her career. But to everyone's relief, Allit had remained cool, calm and collected throughout.
Her colleagues certainly felt sorry for Beverly Allit in the first days because she had been present at several of the attacks.
The truth behind Allit's composure, though, was far more sinister. Over the past 4 weeks, Ward 4 of Grantham Hospital's paediatric unit was having a crisis. 4 of its young patients had all suffered unexplained arrests, 2 of which had resulted in death. Inexperienced nurse Beverly Allit was unfortunate enough to have been present for all of them. Beverly Allit was born on October 4th, 1968, in the pretty village of Corby Glen, nestled in the countryside of Lincolnshire.
Corby Glen is a small village, just on the edge, really, of Lincolnshire and Leicestershire. It's a small community where most people know each other. Most people would know each other's business because of the very nature of the place.
She was one of 4 children. In birth order, she was the second oldest.
From a very early age, she was an attention seeker. It was quite plain that she was an attention seeker.
She seemed to be a pudgy kind of girl who wasn't particularly beautiful or striking or talented or gifted in ways that other people used to get attention. So she found that having a hurt arm or a cut or a bandage or a broken arm or something like that got attention.
She would cut herself on glass more often than anybody else. She would be going to hospital more often than anybody else. But generally I think she seemed to be just a normal child growing up in a rural community.
Beverly's childhood really was unremarkable until she failed her 11 plus, and as a consequence she went to the local secondary modern school. Her older sister Donna went to the grammar school in Grantham.
She left school here as a 16-year-old with very little academic qualification, but was befriended by a nurse from Grantham Hospital who lent her the necessary books and equipment to study to join the nursing profession, which she did when she was about 17 or 18 years of age.
It was this chance meeting that changed the course of Allit's life forever. Whilst on her pre-nursing course, Allit worked part-time at a local pub, where she met several boyfriends.
Interestingly, the boyfriend's nickname for Beverly Allit was the Fable, because she kept inventing stories about herself. And it's this sense, this need for Beverly Allit to draw attention to herself, to be at the center of attention, to have people sympathizing with her, that really is the dominant characteristic of her childhood.
Behind me is the Fighting Cocks pub, where as a teenager she worked behind the bar. And it's where she met her boyfriend at the time, Steve Biggs, who she later went on to beat up quite badly whilst they were engaged to each other.
She humiliated him, she beat him up, she was aggressive.
Allit's aggression towards one she was supposed to love was a chilling glimpse of the future. Although not known by anyone at the time, Beverly Allit's unusual behaviour showed a remarkable likeness to the symptoms of a rare medical disorder.
Munchausen syndrome was based on the case of Baron von Munchausen, which was a individual who traveled around the world and was famous for telling tall tales and fantastic stories about all of his exploits.
With Munchausen, the person will try and draw attention to themselves by causing themselves damage, which is what Beverly did. She injected herself, she cut herself, she did all sorts of strange things to herself.
It's technically called today factitious disorder, which is a conscious production of fake symptoms, but based on unconscious motives. And it's generally believed that at least one of the main motivations, but maybe not all of the motivation for this, is they want attention. They want sympathy brought about them because they're so sick and they're constantly ill and constantly in the hospital and this sort of thing.
They're actually known as hospital hobos or hospital hoppers. Some doctor will wise up and say, you know what, there's not really anything wrong with you, and then they have to go on to another one, and then another one, and another one.
No one could have guessed the implications of Allit's behaviour, and it didn't stop her finding an area of study she felt comfortable with. In September 1988, Allit was accepted by Grantham and Kesteven District Hospital for training as a state-enrolled nurse.
Well, it's no surprise to have her pick, I'm going to be a nurse. This will get her very close to the hospital staff on a daily basis. So that's no surprise to see her go into the medical system at all.
Mysteriously, as soon as Allit enrolls, bizarre incidents begin to take place at the medical college dormitories.
Feces were placed in the fridge, feces were put under the cooker, curtains were set on fire. There was a whole host of these sort of incidents.
These were never specifically identified as being the work of Beverly Allit.
With no culprit coming forward, all of the young students were threatened with being removed from the course unless the incident stopped.
And whilst she was always central to them, they could never actually say that it was her that was responsible.
Whilst on the course, Allit's lies about injuries and illnesses continued to escalate.
She'd injected water into her breasts, so one looked bigger than the other. She'd taken nearly boiling water in her mouth and they're about to take a temperature.
She was off with injuries which were relatively minor. She was off with colds and flu, and it seemed that any excuse would do rather than go into her studies.
Between 1988 and 1990, when her nursing course is going to end, she's going to have had something like 160 sickness days in that period of time.
As a result, although she passed, she only just managed to pass the nursing course.
Having scraped by on her course, Allit decided she would like to train as a children's nurse.
And she was rejected at this particular time, and the board gave the reasons for her rejection as the fact that she hadn't got enough experience of dealing with sick children.
The rejection was a blow for Allit, but she manages to find a position on Ward 4 of Grantham Hospital, where she can get the all-important experience.
This is Grantham Hospital. The boarded building that you see on the right was in fact the front entrance of the hospital back in 1991. For whatever reason, that element of it is now closed. Ward 4, which was the children's ward, sits more or less behind this front facade. Was a typical small ward with private rooms for children.
Ward 4 was the paediatrics unit of the small local Grantham and Kesteven Hospital. It had always been a calm place, with a steady stream of kids with the likes of broken legs or grommets, generally nothing serious. Despite staff shortages there, the nurses took pride in their work, and there was a host of cartoon characters adorning the ward.
There's chronic understaffing at Grantham and Kesteven General Hospital, and therefore they need state-enrolled nurses on Ward 4, and even though Beverly Allit has never really had an appropriate health screening or gone through a CRB check, because the ward is so short of qualified nurses, Beverly Allit is given a job on Ward 4 nursing children.
She was appointed as part of the drive to recruit more nurses. My only regret or sadness is the fact that she was not a children's nurse. She was an enrolled nurse, which is a nurse who has only done 2 years of training, and not a children's nurse who has done at least 3 years of training. But to be truthful, at the time, we were glad of the extra hands.
On February the 18th, 1991, Beverly Allit began her 6-month contract as a nurse at Grantham Hospital.
She seemed quite keen to learn and eager to please.
It seemed that she started just at the right time, as things on the ward suddenly got much busier than usual, with a number of unexpected hypoglycemic attacks ending in the tragic death of 2 young children. The more experienced nurses on the ward had never known it to be so busy.
I remember we thought of all different things it could be. Maybe there was this new bug that was going around that nobody had found yet, or maybe it was just a bad time for us. It does happen. You do have children who are very sick and they do die sometimes.
The last thing anyone expected was that the killer was one of them, someone employed to protect children.
We work on trust. The day we lose our trust, the whole system will collapse.
Over the next 2 weeks, the situation on the ward continues to deteriorate, as another 5 children suffer a total of 7 collapses, one resulting in the death of 9-week-old Becky Phillips.
She'd come in with a tummy upset. She was only brought into the hospital because she'd been a premature baby. Family were a bit concerned. They brought her in. She was examined. She was about ready to go out. She'd got over her diarrhoea and vomiting. She was put in the care of Nurse Allit, and then she got home. She became grizzly and uncomfortable and clammy. She collapsed. She was brought in and she died.
And Becky wasn't the Phillips' only child to suffer at the hands of Nurse Allit. Worried that her twin sister Katie may be suffering from a similar illness, her parents brought her in as a matter of precaution. She inexplicably stopped breathing twice and was resuscitated, but sadly suffered permanent brain damage.
Beverly was regarded as an angel. She had actually found the problem, called the medical advice, and got the Katie treated.
Allit was at the centre of attention again, miraculously always the first to the scene, giving parents the impression she was always going the extra mile.
Her parents think so highly of Allit that they ask Allit to become Katie Phillips's godmother.
The young Nurse Allit was an angel. She had been there for both Becky and Katie and was always on hand to help with the tragic cases that Ward 4 was experiencing. However, when revealed, the truth behind the mysterious deaths would shock the world. Ward 4, the paediatric unit at Grantham Hospital, had had a string of young patients experiencing unusual attacks. One of these was 5-month-old Paul Crampton. On the 12th of April, 16 days after it had been sent for analysis, Paul Crampton's blood was finally tested, and the result was not good news.
The examining scientist had discovered 500 milliunits per litre of insulin in the blood, which is completely unusual because in a child it should be in the region of 10 to 15 milliunits per litre. Since the child had recovered spontaneously, they concluded that either it was a rogue sample or that the child had suffered from an insulinoma, a malfunction of the pancreas which had now righted itself. So no action was taken in respect of that.
A child is in a hospital because they're sick, and so the fact that they would die is not completely unheard of. I mean, people do die in hospitals.
I didn't think that there was anything happening that was caused by a person. It is unthinkable that somebody who is looking after sick children would hurt them. It was unthinkable then. It's unthinkable now.
Over the following 2 weeks, another 10 children collapse, and horrifically, there is yet one more death. On April the 22nd, 15-month-old asthmatic Claire Peck was brought into Ward 4 with a severe attack.
Claire Peck was an absolutely beautiful little girl who had been a regular on our ward. She'd come back several times with asthma, and she would come and have some treatment and get better and go home.
The doctor went off to talk to the family, to reassure the family. Whilst he'd gone, the little girl is left alone with Beverly Allit in the treatment room. She raises the alarm almost immediately and says that this little girl has stopped breathing. The resus team are called, they get the little girl breathing again, and she seems to be on the road to recovery. Doctor goes off to once again speak to the family, and once again within the space of about 90 seconds the alarm is raised by Beverly Allit. The child has stopped breathing. Despite the efforts of the resuscitation team, they couldn't get the child breathing again, and sadly she died.
The day Claire Peck died, I think, was probably the worst day we had. We couldn't believe it. And we couldn't believe she was gone.
We all started getting upset, waiting for someone to come out with some magic answers.
With doctors running out of medical explanations, there seems only one possible conclusion. the killer is closer than they dare imagine. Hospital authorities contact the police.
So on the 30th of April of 1991, I, as Detective Superintendent, get a telephone call to suggest that there may be something untoward happening at Grantham Hospital. The initial meeting at Grantham Hospital took place on Friday the 3rd of May 1991 and was attended by a variety of people, but it included the two consultant paediatricians from Grantham, Dr. Nanyakara and Dr. Porter, and the expert Professor David Hull.
Professor David Hull is asked to produce an independent report. Based on just the medical notes of 14 cases, he concludes that only 3 signal some worry, and only one of these, that of Paul Crampton, seriously concerns him, with the notes showing evidence of an untoward act.
In some police circles, there was the suggestion that we were just wasting money and that we should pull the plug on it. But I chose to go down the route of investigating the circumstances surrounding the collapses, the 3 collapses of Paul Crampton.
Following his detective's instinct, Stuart Clifton senses something is not right and pursues the case.
Stuart Clifton, who was my boss at the time, called a meeting one day in May 1991, and he basically said, I have picked you as a group because of the sensitivity or the potential sensitivity of the case. I don't know what we've got. I want you to go up to the hospital in pairs. I want you to speak to the parents of some of the children, some of the nurses and that, and basically, as I've said, do a fishing expedition and just see what you can find out, really.
The police cautiously began interviewing staff at the hospital. However, as they spoke to more parents and employees, things did not become any clearer.
When we first went to Ward 4 to speak to the nurses and that, it was apparent that not only did the nurses not know themselves what was going on, the parents didn't either. And everybody was sort of just wanting an answer to what was going on, and everybody, quite honestly, was hoping that, you know, that these arrests and that were going to be a natural cause.
Among others, they questioned one nurse who appeared to have been present at nearly all of the incidents, Nurse Beverly Allit.
On the first time that I met her, the 7th of May, Bev came into the side room. She was a quite large, heavily built girl, quiet, pleasant, sat down, spoke, answered all questions really. She was certainly no different to any of the other nurses that I'd spoken to.
Allit had already spent her entire life lying to people, and this interview was to be no different. The truth would remain hidden for now.
But in the meantime, Stuart, obviously running the inquiry, was looking at different angles and that, and he was contacting various paediatric professors and that to have a look at the files of the children involved. And of course from that, then a different story was emerging.
Outside the hospital, Detective Neil Jones was given the task of looking for any other evidence around the 13 children.
I was over at the Queen's Medical Centre and they sent me to the hospital, City Hospital at Nottingham. And I found a big freezer over there and it contained blood samples. And these blood samples were taken for children in the hospital to check for genetic defects, growth analysis, that type of thing. And they were supposed to be destroyed every 3 to 6 months. She didn't clear the fridge very well. So we got in this freezer and we recovered 9 blood samples out of the 13 children that had been attacked.
These samples were sent away to Professor Vincent Marks at the University of Surrey. And among them was a sample of Paul Crampton's, which was tested for a second time.
What he discovered was quite astounding. He discovered that the blood insulin level was not 500, but it was 47,000, which was the second highest ever recorded in the world. We set about looking why there should be such a discrepancy between Cardiff and the University of Surrey, and discovered that the machine on which it was tested at Cardiff was only calibrated to 500 and it had gone off the scale. In this particular case, he concluded that it was injected insulin. So here for the very first time was some evidence that suggested that there was a killer on the ward at Grantham Hospital.
There was a medical report prior to 1991 about 2 cases where babies were administered insulin and various other drugs, and that is a mother who had actually done that intentionally. Now, that in fact was termed Munchausen Syndrome by proxy.
This is when an individual creates false symptoms in somebody else, usually somebody that they're having, that they're in charge of, like their child, for example. And so a mother who's creating false symptoms in their child will put feces, for example, in the baby's formula to give the child a fever. And sometimes in extreme cases, the mother will actually kill the child.
With this revelation in mind, the detectives now needed to ascertain how this could have happened.
We began to look at where the insulin may have come from and discovered that insulin is replaced on the ward from the hospital pharmacy on demand. It's kept on the ward in locked fridges. One key fits any fridge within the hospital. The key to the fridge on the children's ward, Ward 4, went missing. The last person known to have had it was a nurse called Beverly Allit, who had been asked about it and claimed to have handed it on to another nurse.
Professor Marks tested all of the 13 samples, and it turned out that Paul's blood was not the only one with abnormalities.
Becky Phillips' blood came back and it got 9,000 units of insulin in it. There was other samples that got potassium, high levels of potassium, and lignocaine, and various drugs were found in these samples. So obviously that galvanised the inquiry, opened the inquiry to look at it in much more depth.
The gathering evidence was now a clear indicator that there may be a criminal on Ward 4, and action would need to be taken as soon as possible.
Stuart had what he calls his old-fashioned gut feelings, and he then decided that he wanted a chart making, sort of defining every child that had been on the ward that had suffered attacks, marking them, and basically seeing if he could establish timelines and who had been looking after the children.
What began to emerge was a pattern that each and every time Beverly Allit had been left alone with a child, the child collapsed.
I was shocked. I just couldn't believe that she was the nurse who was working with me who actually had been doing it.
The idea that a healthcare professional could actually be responsible for the deaths of people in her charge was a step too far.
She's succeeded in convincing people that she's so caring, why would anyone suspect her?
There was a general feeling that she was being fitted up, you know, that it couldn't possibly be one of us and it couldn't possibly be her.
Beverly Allit was now the prime suspect. Police needed to act fast to protect the rest of the children on Ward 4 from any further attacks. On the 21st of May 1991 at 7 a.m, the police arrest Beverly Allit at her home on suspicion of stealing the key from the insulin fridge and for the attempted murder of Paul Crampton.
At no time did she lose a cool, at no time did she give the impression that she was anxious or that she felt that we knew she was guilty of any offence.
Beverly Allit is taken by Officer Billingsley and Detective Neil Jones to the police station for questioning. Meanwhile, officers search her house.
At the house, officers found a syringe, and in the wardrobe of a bedroom at the house, they found the ward allocation book. We spent hours interviewing her. Again, her reaction was really strange, bearing in mind she'd been arrested on suspicion of murder.
She didn't admit any single offence, but what she did do, she distanced herself and she put other people in the frame for each child.
And it became quite clear that there was no evidence that was going to emanate from her.
I'm really sure that she thought in her own mind that there would be insufficient evidence to convict her of murder.
The unusual circumstance of each attack meant that the police did indeed struggle to gather enough evidence to convict her. Allit was released pending further investigation. And despite the police suspicions, Allit's cold-blooded ways would not stop. On the 21st of May 1991, the police had arrested Beverly Allit for attempted murder, but had to release her due to lack of evidence. Her job as a nurse, one of power and trust, made the investigation that much harder.
One of the problems with killing in a healthcare setting is that as soon as the murder is over, the crime scene itself is sterilized. I mean, it occurs in a hospital, they take the victim out, the body, and the cleaning folks come in and deliberately get rid of anything that could be considered forensic evidence.
It was a serious investigation. Nobody expects a carer in a hospital environment to be killing children, and that's what was happening here. But on top of that, it caught the imagination of the world press. And the consequence of that was that it was big news right across the world.
Detectives were called in after 2 months of mysterious deaths and collapses on Ward 4, the children's ward.
One nurse has been arrested and interviewed at the police station under the provisions of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. There may be a need to see that nurse again. Further than that, I would not wish to speculate about any other matters in connection.
With the world now watching, the investigation continues, but the police get an unexpected response from some of the parents.
Their antagonism is to the police as opposed to the person who might be committing these crimes.
One family engaged private investigators to investigate the police because it was felt that the police were trying to stitch up Beverly Allit.
With Beverly Allit now the leading suspect, she is placed on leave from her position at Ward 4. Whilst the investigation continues, Allit moves in with her close friend Tracy Jobson and her family.
The attack stopped as soon as she left the hospital, and the attack started at the home address in Peterborough where she arrived.
There was things like bleach appearing in Jonathan Jobson's bed, and Jonathan was Tracy's brother.
She gave tablets to the dog, and he was rolling about on the floor outside, frothing at the mouth.
Eileen Jobson, Tracy's mother, was becoming increasingly concerned by events in the household.
Eileen kept saying, who's doing these things? Tracy said she had no idea. Jonathan was saying he had no idea. Beverly was saying she had no idea, but then came up with a version of events that she'd seen a poltergeist and that this poltergeist would be responsible for all of these things. There was an incident where they'd gone to Whittlesea Market and Jonathan Jobson, the brother, had complained of feeling ill.
And whilst shopping, Jonathan collapses and he's taken into Peterborough Hospital, and it's later concluded that he'd had a hyperglycemic attack.
And surprise, surprise, Jonathan was made a drink by Beverly Allit before they left for Whittlesea Market, a blackcurrant juice, which he says tasted funny when he was drinking it.
Eileen Jobson could take it no longer. There was something clearly amiss with Allit's presence in their home. The police were called, and Allit was once again taken into custody.
By November 1991, we were in a position to charge Beverly Allit, and she was charged by Neil Jones with 13 counts, 4 of murder, 8 of attempted murder, and 1 of grievous bodily harm.
Again, Beverly's reaction shocks the police.
Beverly Allit stood there and made no comment whatsoever, no reaction whatsoever. It was unbelievable.
This doesn't reveal her calmness and her coolness. This actually reveals her underlying mental health problems. She's simply not operating on the same moral level, the same rational level as you and I, and therefore can't comprehend the seriousness of the circumstances that she's in.
She went to a cell, she ate a meal, and she slept overnight.
How could anybody sleep when they'd got such horrendous charges hanging over their head? But her sleep continued and she had to be woken to get ready for court the following morning. I just found it quite astounding.
Over the next 15 months, Beverly Allit is held at Wakefield Prison, where she awaits trial. On the 15th of February 1993, the trial of the Crown versus Beverly Gale Allit begins.
A former nurse who's accused of murdering 4 children has gone on trial at Nottingham Crown Court.
Beverly Allit was brought to Nottingham Crown Court from Rampton Hospital to face a total of 26 charges. Allit was arrested last May after what the Crown called a chilling pattern had emerged from the collapse of 13 children, 4 of whom had died.
By the time she came to trial, she'd lost an awful lot of weight, and she didn't attend trial for huge chunks of the period of time, claiming that she was ill.
At court, Beverly Allit pleads not guilty. She doesn't take the stand, and therefore she fits a pattern of a number of serial killers who will be silent in relation to the charges that have been brought against them.
Regardless of Allit's plea, the prosecution's case was watertight. Allit was guilty of all charges. She had been the only one in attendance on all occasions children were attacked on Ward 4, and she had been there when Jonathan Jobson fell ill.
The jury convicted her of 13 counts, 4 of murder, 9 of attempted murder, and the judge gave her 13 life sentences.
Everyone was so overcome with emotion, basically, particularly parents that had lost a child. And the police officers, including Stewart and the prosecuting barrister and that, were absolutely overwhelmed and pleased with the result.
The judge summed up the case by describing Beverly Allit as a very evil lady.
Allit's constant illnesses and history of fictitious injuries had led the police to what they thought was the motive for her evil attacks and murders. Beverly Allit committed crimes that shocked the nation. The nurse that had previously seemed to be an angel, in fact turned out to be an angel of death. But what was it that really drove this seemingly good-natured, caring individual to murder innocent children?
When the court case was over and she had been found guilty, which we then knew was true and we accepted was true, then I wanted her to be in prison and to never come out again.
I believe she is a cold-blooded, calculating killer.
Never at any stage did Beverly Allit express remorse. Even after sentence, when she was seen at Rampton Hospital, not once has she ever expressed any remorse for what she's done.
Undoubtedly, in my mind, she wanted to be the centre of attention in everything she did.
And the fact that 4 children died is almost incidental to the attention that she was seeking.
Beverly Allit had underlying mental health needs, but that doesn't mean to say that she was born to kill. She would harm children and magically appear at the 11th hour as some form of saviour, so as to again draw attention to herself. And that's ultimately why Beverly Allit killed. She wanted to draw attention to herself.
I think Beverly Allit was born with a disposition that under certain conditions would bring out violence, would bring out aggression, and those conditions did occur in her life.
But I imagine these things are built up of little bits of a picture, bits of a jigsaw that all sit together to make the bigger picture and produce someone who harms people and indeed killed them in this particular case.
Between the environment and her disposition, that would make her born to kill.
whatever it was, that's where she finished up, and she finished up committing some horrendous crimes against the innocence of our society, our children.